March 2020, an eerie, unsettling silence draped itself over California like a thick fog. Usually bustling boulevards in Los Angeles and tech hubs in San Francisco became ghost towns overnight as the mandatory lockdown took hold. For millions of Californians, the world didn't just slow down, it stopped entirely. Suddenly, working was a forbidden risk, and the steady hum of the economy was replaced by the frantic heartbeat of a population wondering how they would survive without a paycheck. Families who had lived paycheck to paycheck for years were suddenly pushed off a cliff, staring into an abyss of financial uncertainty. In this moment of unprecedented crisis, eyes turned toward a single monolithic entity, the Employment Development Department, known as the EDD. It was supposed to be the ultimate lifeline and a digital safety net for those who found themselves on the brink of ruin. But behind the digital curtains of the state's bureaucracy lay a ticking time bomb. The department was operating on a skeletal infrastructure, a 30-year-old computer system running on archaic code that was never designed to process even a fraction of the tidal wave of claims now crashing against its servers. While the world moved toward the future, the EDD was trapped in the past, struggling to keep its head above water. Consider the plight of a single mother sitting at her kitchen table in the dim morning light, her hands shaking as she refreshed a browser page for the 100th time. She represents the millions of honest citizens who did everything right. She filed her claim, documented her lost wages, and waited with bated breath. But instead of a check or a confirmation, she was met with a wall of silence. Every phone call resulted in a busy signal or an abrupt disconnection after hours on hold. Her status remained eternally pending, a bureaucratic purgatory that left her unable to pay her rent or fill her refrigerator for her children. The desperation was a cold weight in her chest as the bills stacked higher and the promise of government assistance felt more like a cruel mirage. While this mother struggled, a different kind of observer was watching the chaos with predatory interest. Deep within the EDD's leadership, a fatal decision was made. Overwhelmed by the backlog, officials chose to prioritize speed over security, effectively removing the cross-check features that verified whether an applicant was who they claimed to be. And this was the moment the vault doors were left wide open. International crime rings from Russia, China, and Nigeria, along with sophisticated local fraudsters, spotted the vulnerability instantly. To them, the EDD wasn't a social safety net, it was an unprotected gold mine. This wasn't just a glitch in the matrix. It was an invitation to the greatest heist in modern history. These shadow players began harvesting stolen social security numbers by the thousands, using bots to overwhelm the already fragile system. The EDD, unable to distinguish a grieving mother from a foreign hacker, began mailing out debit cards like they were junk mail. These cards, preloaded with thousands of dollars in taxpayer money, were being sent to vacant houses, abandoned lots, and suspicious addresses that had no connection to legitimate workers. As the true scale of the madness finally began to emerge, when a local district attorney started noticing a bizarre pattern in the mail delivery systems. During a routine investigation, the official made a discovery that sent shock waves through the capital. The state was shipping millions of dollars in benefits directly to San Quentin State Prison. These weren't just minor offenders. The names on the envelopes included some of the most notorious criminals in California, including several killers currently residing on death row, while honest citizens were being evicted and facing hunger. The state was unknowingly funding the lives of the incarcerated. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This discovery was only the first crack in a scandal that would eventually reveal a $20 billion hole in the heart of California. The gates were open and the rush of digital gold had begun. What started as a trickle of suspicious claims quickly erupted into a torrent of illicit wealth. Billions of dollars intended to be a lifeline for the displaced and the desperate were being siphoned away into the pockets of opportunists. This wasn't a subtle theft. It was a brazen looting of the public treasury, executed with an audacity that left seasoned law enforcement officials in a state of disbelief. The state's vault had been left unlocked, and the world had noticed. In the digital age, the spoils of crime were no longer buried in secret caches, but broadcasted for the world to see. The social media platforms became a stage for the victors of this electronic plunder. Scammers, emboldened by the lack of oversight, posted music videos that served as tutorials for theft, flaunting thick stacks of EDD debit cards as trophies. Young men were suddenly seen behind the wheels of luxury cars, their lives transformed overnight by stolen tax money. They mocked the system, celebrating their newfound wealth, while the people who truly needed those funds were left to languish. Deep inside the walls of California's most secure facilities, the heist took on a sinister character. The inmate connection was no longer a theory but a thriving criminal enterprise. Using smuggled cell phones, inmates coordinated with associates on the outside to orchestrate a massive filing operation. They used stolen Social Security numbers, often belonging to the elderly or the deceased, to trigger the release of benefits. The inside job dynamic was perfect. The prisoners had nothing but time to navigate the EDD's archaic online portals, and their counterparts outside acted as the mules, collecting the cards from vacant addresses and withdrawing the cash from ATMs across the state. It was a symbiotic relationship of corruption that spanned from the cell blocks of San Quentin to the streets of suburban neighborhoods. Meanwhile, the real victims were trapped in a nightmare of red tape. The single mother, already reeling from the loss of her livelihood, found her situation going from dire to catastrophic. When she finally reached a representative after days of trying, she wasn't met with help, but with suspicion. Itka, having had her identity stolen by the very crime rings exploiting the system, she was now being flagged as a fraudulent claimant by the agency. The department that had failed to protect her information was now weaponizing that failure against her. She faced the heavy emotional toll of being accused of a crime she didn't commit, all while her bank account dwindled to nothing and the threat of eviction loomed larger. The crisis reached a breaking point when Bank of America, the financial partner responsible for the debit cards, began a massive sweep to stop the fraud. In an attempt to plug the leaks, they used a broad brush that painted thousands of innocent people as criminals. Legitimate accounts were frozen without warning. People found themselves standing at grocery store checkouts, carts full of necessities, ready only to have their cards declined. They were left with zero balances and no way to access their own money. The bank's customer service lines became a chorus of despair, yet the freeze remained, a cold response to a systemic meltdown. As the evidence became undeniable, the EDD leadership remained entrenched in denial. In public statements, officials downplayed the disaster, insisting that the fraud was minimal and that most payments were going to those in need. They clung to their narrative, ignoring the evidence. But the truth was coming. A whistleblower from within the department, who had seen warnings ignored, decided to speak out. This insider revealed that the department had been warned about these loopholes months before the pandemic began. They had chosen to prioritize processing speed over integrity, it creating a $20 billion hole in the California budget, a loss only beginning to be understood. It was the greatest looting of state coffers in modern history, fueled by a total collapse of basic institutional oversight. The dust finally began to settle on the ruined landscape of California's treasury, revealing a crater so deep it defied comprehension. The final tally was no longer a whispered estimate, but a staggering, verified nightmare. Over $20 billion had evaporated. This wealth had flowed through digital veins into international crime rings in Russia, China, and Nigeria. These syndicates treated the aging infrastructure like a limitless ATM, siphoning off the lifeblood of the state. Funds intended to keep families housed were now funding criminal empires half a world away, leaving behind a legacy of institutional shame and economic ruin. In response, a multi-agency task force was assembled to claw back the stolen billions. For months, news cycles were dominated by footage of dawn raids on suburban homes where small-time scammers lived like kings. Low-level opportunists were paraded before cameras as trophies of justice. Yet a hollow feeling remained. The professional cartels and high-level hackers behind the bot attacks remained largely untouched. They were shielded by international borders and untraceable cryptocurrency, leaving the state to punish only the small fish, while the true masterminds vanished into the digital mist, their pockets lined with Californian taxes. While headlines focused on raids, a silent tragedy unfolded for the forgotten victims. Years later, thousands of honest citizens remained trapped in a bureaucratic purgatory. Because their identities were exploited, their records were permanently flagged with fraud. The single mother found herself a pariah in the eyes of the state. Every time she sought help, the system blocked her, treating the victim as a suspect. The glitch that allowed criminals to prosper became a permanent stain on her digital reputation. She was left to navigate endless paperwork, fruitlessly trying to prove she hadn't robbed her own future. The scene eventually shifted to legislative hearings in the state capitol. EDD leadership sat before angry lawmakers, offering technical excuses for a moral catastrophe. They spoke of legacy systems reducing the destruction of lives to administrative errors, and they were confronted with stories of families who lost everything, while the department watched the billions fly out the door. To officials, it was a glitch. To the public, it was total negligence. Each hearing reinforced the perception that speed had been prioritized over integrity, leaving the most vulnerable citizens to pay the ultimate price for bureaucratic incompetence. In a desperate redemption attempt, the department implemented ID.me software. While it blocked fraudulent bots, it created new hurdles. The elderly and tech illiterate were suddenly locked out, unable to navigate facial recognition or digital uploads. The quest for security had built a wall that excluded the very people the safety net was designed to catch. Thousands found themselves stranded again, proving that even the solutions were flawed, even further alienating those who had already suffered through the peak of the crisis without any state assistance. The resolution remains deeply bitter. Most of the $20 billion is gone forever, laundered through global markets beyond recovery. The California taxpayer must now foot the bill for this massive deficit. This stolen wealth will be repaid through years of budget cuts and service reductions, a debt passed to the very public the department failed to protect. The financial wound is permanent, a constant reminder of what happens when the guardrails of a society are abandoned in the name of expediency. This scandal leaves a lasting scar on the state. It is a powerful lesson about the fragility of the social safety net and the devastating cost of incompetence. When trust is broken on such a scale, the damage cannot be repaired with simple apologies or software updates. California learned the hard way that during a crisis, the true value of a government lies in its ability to protect its most vulnerable. Instead, millions were left to wonder why their own safety was worth less than a criminal's payday. The heist of the century serves as a warning that when oversight vanishes, everyone pays the price for the systemic silence that allowed such a tragedy to endure.